Everybody, I'm Mike Hayes, and we're continuing our series for A Week for Life here in the Diocese of Cleveland. And Father Joe Koopman is the moral theologian for the Diocese of Cleveland. And so thanks for joining us, number one.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about the issue of assisted suicide. And so let's just start real simple. And so what is the church's teaching on assisted suicide? And maybe how does that differ from something like refusing extraordinary means to preserve one's life, if that makes sense?
Sure, yeah, it does. That actually is probably going to require a little bit of technical explanation, Michael, if that's okay. So
That's fine, yeah.
all right, good.
And I'll ask all the dumb questions if I don't understand
Please.
something.
Please do so as I go along. If I sound too complex, please, absolutely pipe in. So, assisted. Obviously, the church has a lot of concerns about assisted suicide, and in fact, calling it intrinsic evil. So we'll get to the why in a moment. But the moral question is, how do you make distinctions versus when someone's dying, versus what assisted suicide might be? And when we approach moral questions, what I always say, the first question we ask is, what are you doing morally? Like, what exactly are you doing morally? So when it comes to assessing what assisted suicide is, we just have to ask that question. So what is assisted suicide? It's, any act or decision you make. So that can either be an action you're doing or an action you're not doing, like an omission, right? Where your intention in doing that or not doing it is to bring about the death of another person. Now, right now, when we use physician-assisted suicide or assisted suicide, the context is usually someone who is sick, who's terminal.
Sure.
What's interesting is that itself, that's true now, but does it simply have to be someone who is terminal? Could it be someone who, let's say, who's depressed? And what we see is there is a slippery slope with assisted suicide where we've seen this kind of expand. But right now, if you want to identify what it is, it's mostly understood as any act or, again, a failure to act. But what's my intention? I'm doing this because I want to kill this person. I want to bring about their death. That's what you're doing. So that's the specific thing. In those cases, whether it's something we're omitting or often cases it's something we're doing, the church has grave concerns because, again, it's a form of, again, thou shalt not kill. So, but also there's a variety of different reasons which we can talk about that the church has concerns with. And realize, I just want to be broad too, assisted physician suicide can be something that you assist another. So it's not as if the doctor, for instance, has to give the final shot, but simply a doctor prescribing, let's say, a lethal pill. So the case, like for the Brittany Maynard example that happened out west years ago, it's a matter of a physician who's assisting by providing lethal drug combinations so that a sick person who's terminal may take those drugs on their own. But it's still a form of assisted suicide by a physician. So I want to clarify that point. Euthanasia is a little bit different. It's times in which the doctor actually is involved in the direct killing. Sometimes the person asks for it. Sometimes the person is, it's non-voluntary. They don't know what's going on. And sometimes it's involuntary, so those are the different stages. But assisted physician suicide is a little bit different. Now you ask the question, what about extraordinary methods to preserve one's life? And this is where it gets a little technical. And so again,
Sure.
If there's any clarification, I provide that. Remember, when we talk about withholding something, like let's say a medical intervention, a treatment, so let's say a ventilator, let's say certain drugs, a radical form of chemotherapy or whatever it is, know that whenever we're doing that, if the intention is, I want to kill this person, it's always wrong. So if you go back to what I said before, if our intention is, I'm doing this because I'm withholding this because I want to kill them, it remains something that's wrong. However, there's times in which we can withhold what's called optional treatment. So treatments that are optional. And the reason is, and there's a variety of reasons the church gives. It's futile. It's not going to benefit the person. And we simply choose not to go through a line of treatment, not because we want to directly kill them, but rather there is, as the church says, no reasonable hope of benefit. And that's the important line. Is there a reasonable hope of benefit? In other words, what's the purpose of a ventilator? It's to have you breathe again, as we see with the COVID cases.
Right.
What's the purpose of a radical chemo radiation treatment? It's to get rid of the cancer. What's the purpose of a resuscitation? All right, so you have a resuscitation order. It's to get the heart back going so you get to better health. There's times in which, if pursuing a certain course of action, if there's no reasonable hope that you're going to get any better, that you're going to be able to breathe on your own, for instance, if there's no reasonable hope that this treatment will help you overcome the cancer, I'm using some just examples.
Sure, yeah.
Then the church says, listen, those situations become disproportionate, extraordinary. You have the decision, because it's optional now, to say, I choose not to pursue this. And this is what undergirds this, which is very important. We have a duty to preserve our own lives. That's something that's very important. It's because life is a good thing. But we also believe as Christians that life is not simply here, that we're meant for heaven. And we have to balance those two realities, that we have to do everything to help preserve our lives, to foster good health. But if it's a situation where we're so sick that there's nothing we can do, that this course of treatment can't help, then we can choose not to pursue it, mindful that we're made for another life with God in heaven. Right. So it's balancing these things. However, if I choose not to be on a ventilator because it's futile, it doesn't mean I'm doing it because I want to kill myself. It's just the reality that death is part, unfortunately, of the human condition. So that would be, it seems, and this is the tough part, it seems as if they are the same thing. What's the difference? But these little distinctions are critical, because the church is saying it's a gigantic difference, going in and saying, I'm doing this action to kill someone, versus, well, if I were to go and do this intervention, it's extreme, it's extraordinary. I'm gonna leave this alone. We're not gonna pursue this simply because this person really is on their way back to God. Right. It's a whole different mentality. It's a whole different moral action. So that would be, again, as simple as I hopefully can make it. So
yeah, no, that sounds about right. You know, my dad was 90 and had congestive heart failure, and he made it very, very clear to us that, look, he said, I'm not getting any better. The doctors tell me that this is end stage, and I don't want to be on a ventilator.
Right.
You know, I'm fine. You know, it's not going to make me any better. We've already been down that road. And he said, so just, you know, it's okay. You know, I want to go home to God. And that's basically what we called hospice at that moment, you know, and you know, he died very peacefully, you know.
And Mike, I want to say this, because sometimes I get some resistance on this. I encourage anyone who's listening that says that doesn't sound right, because oftentimes when I go to the hospitals, it's like, well, Father, the doctors are saying that we shouldn't pursue this line of treatment because it's not going to work. But we know that, for instance, that's not church teaching. Like, we can't pull the plug because the church says we can't. And it's an awkward moment, because you're like, well, the church actually doesn't say that. I mean, it says there's times you can't, there's times you have to keep someone on, right. But there are times that you don't have to. And I just wanted to throw it out to the listeners here. If you don't believe you, if they don't believe you, if they don't believe me, the Catechism has a great section on this. So you can, what we're talking about, you can actually trust the church, read the Catechism, know that this is part of the church's teaching in the Catechism itself. So I just want to throw that out there in case people have questions about that. As if if they really think we're making this up, see what the church actually teaches on it. It's exactly what we've been talking about. So
exactly. Yeah, we don't make things up here at Week for Life. And if we did, that'd be much more interesting than that, I'm sure. But anyway, silliness aside, what are some present issues, like here in Northeast Ohio, that we should be concerned about when it comes to assisted suicide? You know, or the things that are on the dockets, or things.
Sure. You know, unlike, this is a unique time in our history, and this is why when we talk about awareness of movements and politics, this really should be more in the front and center of us as Catholics. The reason is this. In 1973, with Roe versus Wade, abortion was pretty much decided as law throughout the whole country. Now we have a tremendous pro-life movement in terms of the abortion issue that attempts to change legislation, but yet it still remains an uphill battle. We've had great victories, but it is the law of the land. That is not the case when it comes to physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. Right now, most of the current laws of our country and states are actually take more of a Catholic perspective. However, this is why we have to keep it in the fore, because the fact remains is that there are a lot of lobbying efforts and groups that are attempting to change laws that protect patients and the vulnerable by making assisted physician suicide illegal, or it is illegal, by protecting those laws that these groups are really trying to overturn. So it's often called death, the right to die movement, or death with dignity movements. They have different names. Literally are active in every single state of our country in local legislatures trying to overturn the assisted physician suicide laws. Like currently right now, for instance, in our country, we have like New Jersey, California, Washington, I'm trying to think what else, New
Oregon.
Jersey, Maine, I think.
Yeah, Oregon also, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, Oregon,
Yeah.
Colorado, Hawaii. These are states, but not Ohio, not the states around us. But know that there's actually a right to die and a death for dignity movement right in Columbus. There's been no legislative advances this past year, which is a great thing. But the reason I mention this is because if we grow complacent, it won't be long before this begin to influence the political structure of not just simply those states, but our own states. So just want to let it know to be aware of. And there's also, again, there's countries that allow full out euthanasia. So to be very aware of that too. And that includes, and this is very important, Canada.
I was gonna say just north, yeah.
Right. We have a First Friday club here, a Catholic First Friday club that meets downtown. And it was just this past year, maybe a year and a half ago, we had a speaker come in talking and really sounding the alarm that it's not that far from us, right up north. Canada has a very disturbing laws concerning euthanasia. So it is surrounding us. And I think we need to be aware of the dangers that are posed by this.
Yeah.
So.
And does some of the long-term, I guess worries is the right word, but about this becomes then who decides, like if,
right.
Even if we had individuals deciding, these death with dignity things, it could get much worse, because then you could have, sort of like death panel kind of thing saying, well, everybody above 85 now no longer gets these treatments.
Right. Yeah. So when you hear that, the death panels, it's not like, all right, we're going to go out and euthanize, but what it is precisely that we're simply not going to provide the care. And we see other countries in Europe doing this. You get to a certain point, we're not going to provide free. You can do it if you want to pay, but we're not going to provide any ICU insurance, or we're not going to cover that, which virtually means, as you said, a decision made by others. And I know some on the pro euthanasia side don't like to hear this, but there's a compelling argument, even in terms of history, of a certain slippery slope. So, for instance, the Action T4 movement, which was in Germany, that was a very pro euthanasia, began with a very small group, and then eventually began to expand. And again, it went from voluntary euthanasia to involuntary, forcing people, actually going in against their will. If that seems too, because Nazis are so egregious what they did, you can look to more of a very liberal modern example, would be the Netherlands, one of the countries that has had euthanasia. Went from just, if you want to do it on a voluntary basis and your physician wants to assist you, that's fine, to all of a sudden in 2004 passing what's called the Groningen Protocol, which basically gave parents the right to euthanize their children. Well, again, children don't have a right. Infants don't have reason to say, I want this or not. But we see this slippery slope from, like you just said, Michael, who decides? So we see kind of a slippery slope where this idea that certain life not worth living, and even if you don't think so, we think so, and thus those decisions made by, other people or bureaucracy or, the government. So.
Right. Right. Okay. Practical question, maybe.
Sure.
I'm a parish. I'm an individual in a parish. How do I get involved in this movement here in
Yeah.
Northeast Ohio?
I would say politically, there's still if you just Google in terms of euthanasia or right to die, you'll see the efforts that are being made. Be very cautious politically of these different things. Uh, I also just encourage getting to know the church teaching more what we began. So know those distinctions here. We do, for instance, believe there's a great value to hospice, and I think that the more we can respect those that are suffering and love them as being vulnerable, we in our own actions and love can overcome an attitude where if you're sick, your life is not worth living. If you're in pain, you have no dignity. These kind of things can be overturned by our own acts of love. I know, like, for instance, as a priest working in hospice, visiting patients, and we have, there's a lot of this in the area. We have Malachi House, we have Holy Family, we have a lot of these different groups where again, we journey with those who are sick. We accompany them. We provide help when they're in pain, but we love them because they have dignity, no matter how much their life lacks certain things like communicating or walking or being mobile, or even the pain that they can endure. I think the more we can witness to in our own love for those vulnerable is a great way for us to soften our hearts and be a witness to others about this important issue. So.
Yeah, I know in my own work in ministry, one of the things I did was I worked as a volunteer at Calvary Hospital in the Bronx, which is a hospice type of a hospital. Everybody who's there, mostly cancer patients, I would say, but everybody is terminal. And
Yeah.
so my job was just to visit people, and you learn a whole lot about the human condition just by doing that, right?
Right.
That's the first thing. But then the second thing, you really start to see how much dignity these people have, even though they have a terminal diagnosis, and how much life there really is in a
Yeah.
place like that. I've done the same kind of thing at Malachi House as well. And
Well, I was going to say Malachi House is a
that's just
great
a
great
great
example of
place.
that. And my dad was very active in Malachi House too. To even give space to have them hear the stories. I mean,
Yes,
those
that's right.
that have had difficult lives that are dying alone now are not dying alone, and to hear their story and to love them through this final stage is a lot more different than just simply saying your life's not worth living.
Right.
It is even to the end.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you're right.
Yeah. No, it's been great. And a real quick story about Malachi House
Sure,
that we
yeah, I
can
would love
wrap
to
up.
hear it.
So I took a group of students from the University of Buffalo to Cleveland for an alternative break, and one of the places that we volunteered just for a day was Malachi House. And what they asked us to do is there was a woman there who was, I think she was 94 if my memory is accurate, and we she came down, and it was St. Patrick's Day, and they said we're going to throw a St. Patrick's Day party for anyone who's able to come down. Well, she was the only person who was really able to come down,
Wow.
and they put a big goofy St. Patrick's Day hat on her, and we had cake, and we heard all our old stories, and we just had a great day with her, And the next day we woke up, and the one of the people who was working with us at Malkias had sent me an email and said, I just wanted to let you all know that Helen died last night.
Wow. Wow.
And what I wanted to say was thank you for making her last moments of life so filled with joy.
Yeah, celebration.
Oh, right? And that's really what it was. And we were like, that's the gift that we were able to provide for her in the last moments of her life. But more so, that's the gift that she was able to provide us
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
at
Yeah.
the end. That we all kind of came away with that at the end. So,
Yeah.
Malky House in Cleveland, a
Thumbs up.
wonderful, wonderful organization. So this has been A Week for Life, and we've been talking today with Father Joe Koopman, a moral theologian here in the Diocese of Cleveland. I'm Mike Hayes. We got a few days left, so we will see you all again tomorrow.